Waitress accidentally calls the Mafia boss sweetheart. He replied, "Say that again, but in my bedroom." Comment below what you thought of this story. Give it a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know if you enjoyed it and get to know you all better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on you. The rain lashed against the windows of the Crimson Palace that Friday night, turning Chicago's Wicker Park into a blur of neon lights reflected on the wet asphalt. Chloe Miller adjusted her black apron for the third time in 5 minutes, a nervous habit she had whenever she was anxious. Her red hair was pulled back into a flawless bun, a few rebellious strands escaping to frame her face of delicate yet expressive features. She didn't want to be there, not at that specific table, not on a night when her body already ached with exhaustion after a 6-hour straight shift. The restaurant was especially bustling that night. The buzz of conversations in Italian and English mixed with the clinking of crystal glasses and the intoxicating aroma of black truffles and red wine sauce wafting from the kitchen. Chloe watched for a moment the synchronized dance of the waiters among the tables, each one knowing their role perfectly in this gastronomic orchestra. It was a ballet she had mastered after 3 years of working there, but tonight every step felt heavier, every professional smile required more effort than usual. Sarah, the waitress who normally served table 17, had called crying an hour earlier, begging Chloe to cover for her because her son had a high fever. As always, Chloe couldn't say no. It had been that way for as long as she could remember, always putting others' needs before her own, always being the strong one, the responsible one, the one everyone could rely on. But as she walked toward the most discreet corner of the restaurant, where table 17 awaited its sole occupant, something different ran down her spine, a premonition she couldn't name. Her work shoes made a rhythmic sound against the imported marble floor, each step bringing her closer to the inevitable. Chloe took a deep breath, smoothed her apron one more time, and forced her shoulders back into a posture of confidence she didn't feel. She had served hundreds of customers over the years, some arrogant, others charming, many completely forgettable. There was no reason to believe this one would be any different, despite the strange feeling pulsing through her veins. The man's back was to her at first, just a powerful silhouette cut against the window overlooking the street. Even without seeing his face, Chloe felt the authority that emanated from him, the way he occupied the space around him, as if he owned not just the table, but the entire restaurant, maybe the entire city. When he turned and his eyes met hers, Chloe momentarily forgot how to breathe. Leo Costello was the kind of man who made women forget their own names. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that his impeccably tailored suit accentuated rather than hid, his black hair was combed back, revealing sharp, masculine features. But it was his eyes that held her captive, dark as the night outside, piercing in a way that made Chloe feel he could see through all her defenses, all the masks she wore to survive in this cruel world. He had a strong jaw, a small, almost imperceptible scar above his left eyebrow, and lips that looked as if they were sculpted by a Renaissance artist. He was, objectively, the most handsome man Chloe had ever seen in person, and that irritated her deeply because she had neither the time nor the emotional energy to deal with handsome men tonight. "Good evening, sweetheart. What can I get you for a starter?" The words slipped out automatically, a years-long habit from waiting tables, an affectionate and casual way of treating customers that had always worked well. But the moment the last sound left her lips, Chloe realized the monumental mistake she had made. The air between them shifted, becoming dense, charged with an electricity that made every hair on her body stand on end. Leo leaned forward slightly, a dangerous smile curving his lips as his eyes never left hers. There was something predatory in that smile, but also a spark of genuine interest that made Chloe's stomach clench. "Say that again." His voice was husky, controlled, but with an undercurrent of something that made Chloe's heart race. But in my bedroom this time, not here. The world seemed to stop. Chloe felt the heat rise up her neck, coloring her cheeks a shade of red that she knew contrasted dramatically with her hair. She should have been offended, should have rebuked him for his audacity, but all she could do was grip the tray tighter so he wouldn't notice how her hands were shaking. Her brain screamed at her to say something sharp, to put this presumptuous man in his place, but her mouth seemed to have forgotten how to form words. "I'm sorry, sir. That was inappropriate of me," she finally managed to say, forcing professionalism into her voice, even as she felt her heart pounding against her ribs. "What would you like to order?" Leo leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made Chloe feel simultaneously uncomfortable and inexplicably drawn in. He picked up the wineglass already on the table, swirled the dark red liquid thoughtfully, but his eyes never left her face. It was as if he were memorizing every detail, cataloging every reaction, reading stories in the small expressions she tried to hide. "Your name," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a gentle but unequivocal command. Chloe hesitated. Giving her name felt like crossing an invisible line, turning this from a professional encounter into something more personal. But there was something in his eyes, a promise of danger mixed with fascination that drew honesty from her against her will. "Chloe. Chloe," he repeated slowly, savoring each syllable as if it were a rare wine. And the way her name sounded in that voice did something strange to her stomach. "Chloe, tell me, do you always treat your customers with such affection, or am I special?" She should have lied. Should have said it was just professional courtesy, but something about this man extracted honesty from her in a way that frightened her. "It was a mistake, sir. I don't normally wait this table, but you are today," and he made it sound like destiny, not coincidence. "And maybe it's for the best, because now I know someone like you exists in this world." Chloe felt she was losing control of the situation, sinking into quicksand with every word exchanged between them. Around them, the restaurant continued its normal rhythm, but it was as if an invisible bubble separated them from the rest of the world. She could see other waiters passing out of the corner of her eye, customers laughing, life going on. But it all seemed distant and unimportant compared to the intensity of that moment. "I need to take your order, sir." "I have other tables," she said, trying to regain some control over the situation that was rapidly slipping from her grasp. Leo studied her for another long moment before finally picking up the menu, his long, elegant fingers flipping through the pages without really looking at them. There were discreet but clearly expensive rings on two of his fingers, and Chloe noticed that his hands were smooth but also suggested strength. "Bring me what you recommend, Chloe. I trust your taste." The way he said her name, as if he had every right to use it so familiarly, should have annoyed her. Instead, it sent a shiver down her spine that she chose not to analyze too closely. And so it began. In the days that followed, Leo returned to the Crimson Palace every night, always requesting table 17, always waiting for Chloe. She tried to avoid him, asked Sarah to take back her duties, but the manager insisted that the client had specifically requested that only Chloe serve him, and important clients could not be denied. By the third day, Chloe was on the verge of quitting. She didn't understand the effect this man had on her, the way he could make her feel exposed and vulnerable with just a look. But financial reality was relentless. Her mother's medical bills kept piling up, and jobs that paid as well as the Crimson Palace were rare for someone without a college degree. So she took a deep breath, tied on her apron, and decided she could handle an insistent customer, no matter how unsettling he was. Each encounter was a delicate, dangerous dance. Leo was never explicitly inappropriate, never touched her without permission, but there was a growing intimacy between them that transcended words. He learned that she supported her sick mother and younger brother, that she had been studying business administration against all odds, that she dreamed of owning her own business, but financial reality kept those dreams firmly out of reach. He asked questions in a way that seemed genuinely interested, not just polite small talk to fill the silence. He wanted to know about her unfinished thesis, about management theories she found fascinating, about how she balanced work and school and still found time to care for a family. And when she spoke, he truly listened, his eyes never wandering to his phone or the surrounding restaurant, his entire focus on her in a way that was both flattering and unnerving. Chloe learned that he was a widower, that he had lost his wife in circumstances he never specified, but which clearly haunted him, that he owned not just that restaurant, but several other businesses across the city. There was a sadness in his eyes when he spoke of Julia, an old pain that time had softened but not healed. Chloe found herself wanting to know more about this woman who clearly still occupied such a large space in his heart, but also feeling an irrational pang of something that could be jealousy for someone who was no longer alive. What she didn't know, what he carefully omitted, was the true nature of his empire. Leo Costello was much more than a successful businessman. He was a prince of organized crime, the heir to generations of Costellos who had built their power in the shadows of Chicago, controlling territories through a calculated combination of fear, respect, and violence when necessary. It was on a rainy Thursday, 3 weeks after that first meeting, that everything changed. Chloe was finishing her shift, counting her tips in a tiny back room, when she found Leo waiting for her at the employee exit. He was leaning against a car that she recognized as absurdly expensive, even without knowing anything about luxury cars, his hands in the pockets of his tailored trousers, his tie slightly loosened in a way that made him look less intimidating and more human. The rain had returned, a fine drizzle that created halos around the streetlights, and he was partially wet, as if he'd been waiting there for some time. Chloe's heart skipped a beat seeing him there, outside the safe context of the restaurant, without the professional barrier their previous interactions had maintained. It was different seeing him like this, on her turf, waiting for her as if he had every right to be there. "I need to talk to you," he said when she stopped a few feet away. Raindrops glistening in his dark hair, somewhere private. Every alarm bell in Chloe's brain went off at once. She knew the dangers of getting involved with powerful men. She had seen what happened to women who believed in pretty promises and woke up in cruel realities. Her own father had been charming and convincing until the day he disappeared, leaving a sick wife and 2 young children to fend for themselves. The lesson had been clear. Men who seemed too good to be true usually were. "I don't think that's a good idea, Mr. Costello," she said, pulling her thin jacket tighter around herself, trying to create a physical barrier since she couldn't create an emotional one. "Leo," he corrected, taking a step toward her but stopping when he saw her flinch. "My name is Leo, and I'm not going to hurt you, Chloe. I just need an hour of your time, an honest conversation away from this place." "Why?" she asked, her voice coming out more defiant than she intended. "Why me? Why now? What do you want that you can't say here?" Leo ran a hand through his wet hair, a gesture of frustration that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Because you haunt me," he said simply. "Because I can't stop thinking about you since that first night, and I need to know if it's just me feeling this or if there's something here worth exploring." The raw honesty in his voice made something inside Chloe melt. She recognized that feeling because it mirrored her own, that persistent sense that something important was happening, something that went beyond physical attraction or casual flirtation. Against her better judgment, against all the lessons life had taught her, Chloe agreed. She got into his car, the interior smelling of expensive leather and a subtle cologne that was unmistakably masculine, and they drove in silence to a penthouse on the Gold Coast. in place of such extreme luxury that it made Chloe finally understand the vastness of the social chasm that separated them. The apartment was all glass and modern lines, with a panoramic view of the city that glittered like a sea of artificial stars. Chloe stood in the spacious living room, feeling completely out of place in her simple work clothes, her apron still folded in her bag. Artworks that she was sure cost more than she would earn in a lifetime decorated the walls. The floor was Italian marble, so polished it reflected the city lights below. It was an alien world, beautiful but cold, and she wondered how anyone could feel at home in a place like this. "Why am I here, Leo?" she asked as soon as the door closed behind them, turning to face him. "What do you want from me?" He poured 2 glasses of red wine from a bottle that probably cost more than Chloe's monthly rent, handed one to her, and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stood there, a dark silhouette against the glow of Chicago, and Chloe could see the tension in his shoulders, the internal struggle happening behind those dark eyes. "You scare me, Chloe," he said finally, turning to face her. "You scare me because when I look at you, I see possibilities I thought were dead for me. I feel things I swore I'd never feel again." She could have laughed, could have scoffed at the drama of the statement, but there was a raw sincerity in his voice that stopped her. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, the vulnerability of someone who rarely allowed himself to be vulnerable. "You don't know me," she said instead, taking a sip of the wine and trying not to show her surprise at how good it was. "You don't know anything about me besides what I've told you in those quick conversations at the restaurant." Leo turned to face her completely, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "I know you're strong, much stronger than you should have to be. I know you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and never complain. I know you have scars that no one sees but that shape every decision you make. And I know that when you smile, really smile, not that professional smile you use with customers, but the genuine one I saw once when you were reading a text on your phone, the whole world gets brighter." Chloe's defenses began to crack. No one had ever seen her like that, truly seen past the facade of competence and strength she showed the world. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time to be seen so completely by someone who was practically a stranger. "Why me?" she whispered, placing the wine glass on a nearby table because her hands had started to shake. "You could have any woman in Chicago." "Because you don't want anything from me," he said simply, stopping just inches from her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "Because you look at me like a man, not a bank account or a social ladder. Because you challenge me without fear and make me want to be better than I am." "And what kind of man are you, Leo?" Chloe asked, forcing herself to maintain eye contact, even though she felt she could drown in those dark eyes. The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meanings. Leo had the decency to look conflicted, to hesitate before answering. "A complicated man, Chloe. A man with a dark past and a present you might not be able to accept." She should have left right then, should have recognized the warning for what it was, but instead she found herself walking toward him, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious face usually let on. "Then show me," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Show me who you really are." The kiss, when it came, was devastating. Leo pulled her into his arms with an urgency that stole the air from her lungs, one hand tangling in her hair and releasing the careful bun she had made hours before, the other pressing against her lower back, pulling her closer. His lips claimed hers with a passion Chloe had never experienced before, not in the hesitant kisses of high school boyfriends or the bland dates she had tried over the years. This was different. It was consuming. It was as if he were trying to memorize the taste of her, the feel of her, as if this were the first and last kiss at the same time. Chloe melted against him, her fingers tangling in his hair, which was softer than it looked, all rational thought evaporating under the heat of that contact. She could feel his heart hammering against his chest, mirroring the frantic rhythm of her own. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. Leo rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, as if trying to anchor himself in that moment. "Chloe," he murmured against her lips, "if we do this, if you really do this, it will change everything. There's no going back." "Then we don't go back," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice, and kissed him again. The months that followed were a roller coaster of intense emotions. Leo courted her in ways that ranged from the extravagant to the intimately personal. He paid off her mother's medical debts without her asking, a gesture that made her cry with relief and anger simultaneously, because she hated being indebted to anyone, but couldn't deny the enormous weight that had been lifted from her shoulders. He enrolled her brother Ryan in a better school, a private institution that offered opportunities Chloe could never have provided on her own. But Leo also learned quickly that what she truly valued were not the grand gestures. Chloe treasured the nights he showed up unannounced with Thai food because he remembered her mentioning it was her favorite, or the morning she woke up to texts from him quoting books they had discussed, showing he actually paid attention to their conversations. He took her for walks through the city he commanded, but that she knew in ways he had never seen, showing him small, family-owned bakeries in Lincoln Park, street markets in River North, places where the real Chicago lived, far from the expensive restaurants and luxury hotels. Gradually, Chloe began to understand the true extent of Leo's empire. She met his associates, men with hard eyes and stories that were never fully told. She saw the deference with which everyone treated him, the thinly veiled fear even from those who considered themselves his friends. And slowly, piece by piece, she assembled the puzzle of who Leo Costello really was. There were signs she had chosen to ignore at first. The way waiters and establishment owners would give a slight bow when Leo entered, as if paying reverence to royalty. The phone conversations in Italian he sometimes had, his voice low and threatening in a way she had never heard when he spoke to her. The men who always seemed to be nearby, discreet but alert, who she eventually realized were his security detail. The nervous respect from people who clearly feared him as much as they admired him. The revelation came one night when she accidentally witnessed a meeting she wasn't supposed to see. Leo had asked her to wait in the living room while he quickly handled a business matter in his office. But the door wasn't completely closed, and Chloe heard Leo giving orders about territories and payments. Saw through the crack the side of him that commanded an empire built on foundations the law did not approve of. There was a coldness in his voice when he spoke to those men, an absolute authority that brooked no argument. And for a terrifying moment, Chloe saw a stranger where she thought she knew the man she loved. When he found her standing in the doorway minutes later, her face pale with shock and understanding, the silence between them was deafening. Leo dismissed the men with a gesture, and they left quickly, casting curious glances at Chloe as they passed. "Now you know," he said when they were alone, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying genuine concern. "Now you understand why I hesitated to let you into this world." Chloe felt the floor disappear from under her. Everything she had been raised to believe, all the values her mother had worked so hard to instill in her, screamed for her to run, to cut all ties with this man who lived outside the law. She thought of her mother, who had fought within the law her whole life and was still crushed by poverty and illness. She thought of Ryan, who had grown up seeing friends seduced by crime because it seemed like the only way out of misery. And she looked at Leo, this man who made her feel more alive than she had ever felt, but who represented everything she was supposed to reject. You hurt people, she said. Not a question, but a statement. You destroy lives. Leo didn't try to deny or downplay it. Yes, he said simply. I have hurt people. I have destroyed lives. I built my empire on foundations you have every right to judge. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, tears burning her eyes and starting to stream down her cheeks. I don't know if I'm strong enough to accept this world. Leo didn't try to convince her, didn't make empty promises that he would change or that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Instead, he just nodded, accepting her truth with a sad grace that somehow hurt her even more. I understand, he said, taking a step back as if creating physical distance could somehow make it easier. And if you need to leave, I'll let you go. But know that I love you, Chloe Miller. I love you in ways I didn't even know were possible, and that will never change. It was the first time he had said those words, and of course it had to be at the moment everything was falling apart. Chloe spent the next few days in agony. She didn't go back to Leo's apartment, didn't answer his calls or texts, and desperately tried to return to the life she had before him. But it was impossible. She saw his face in strangers on the street, missed him like a physical ache in her chest, and woke up in the middle of the night with the taste of his kisses still a phantom on her lips. Her mother, ever perceptive, sensed something was wrong. She found Chloe crying in the kitchen one night, unable to hide the anguish that consumed her any longer. When she finally told her about Leo, omitting the sordidest details, but being honest about his position in society and the implications of his work, the reaction was worse than she had imagined. Men like him destroy women like us, her mother said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears and painful memories that never fully healed. They promise you heaven, but deliver you hell. I lived it once with your father. I won't stand by and watch you make the same mistake. But Leo isn't like my father, Chloe protested, feeling torn between loyalty to her mother and love for Leo. He's different, Mom. He's honest about who he is. He never lied to me. They're all different until they're not, the answer came, bitter and weary, carrying decades of disillusionment. Chloe's brother Ryan was more direct when she finally mustered the courage to tell him too. I've seen that guy on the news, Chloe, he said, his 17 years making him simultaneously too young and too old for the wisdom he tried to impart. He's not clean. You're playing with fire, and if you get burned, we get burned with you. The pressure came from all sides. At work, colleagues commented on her relationship with the mysterious boss in tones that ranged from envy to genuine concern. Sarah, who had become a close friend, pulled Chloe aside one day and said, "Just make sure you know what you're getting into, because guys like that, they don't come with instruction manuals, and the mistakes cost a lot more." In Leo's world, she felt the judgmental stares of those who considered her unsuitable in the brief encounters she'd had before everything fell apart. There were women in those circles, wives and girlfriends of associates, who looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain, as if she were a naive child playing in a world of dangerous adults, and maybe they were right. The situation came to a head 3 weeks later when Chloe started receiving threats. First, it was anonymous texts, vague but sinister messages suggesting she should stay away from Leo if she knew what was good for her. Then, someone followed her home, a dark car that kept its distance but was always there, a menacing presence that made her constantly look over her shoulder. And finally, a real kidnapping attempt that was only thwarted because Leo's security, which she didn't know existed until that moment, intervened. Chloe didn't even see the men approaching. She was walking from the L train station to her apartment, a route she had taken 1,000 times, when suddenly strong hands grabbed her. She tried to scream, but a hand covered her mouth. And it all happened so fast, she barely had time to process the terror before her attackers were violently pulled away from her. Leo's men appeared out of nowhere, neutralizing the threat with a brutal efficiency that was both terrifying and comforting. When Leo showed up at her tiny apartment on the south side 20 minutes later, a place she was always ashamed to show him with its peeling paint and old furniture, his face was a mask of fury and fear she had never seen before. He frantically checked her for injuries, his hands trembling slightly as they touched her face. "This has to end," he said, his voice hoarse with barely controlled emotion. "I can't protect you like this anymore. They know you're my weakness. They'll keep trying to use you against me. Then teach me to be strong," Chloe replied, her own anger finally bubbling to the surface after weeks of fear and uncertainty. "Teach me how to survive in this world of yours instead of trying to hide me from it." Leo looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "You don't understand what you're asking," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't a game, Chloe. People die in this world." "I understand perfectly," she shot back, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I'm asking you to stop treating me like a porcelain doll that's going to break. I'm asking you to let me stand by your side for real, not hidden in a protective bubble that only makes me more vulnerable. If I'm going to be in danger anyway, then at least give me the tools to defend myself." The argument that followed was epic, years of frustrations from both sides finally exploding. Leo admitted his fear of losing her as he had lost Julia, revealing details he had never shared before about how his wife had died, shot by a rival in an attempt to weaken him, how he had found her bleeding on the marble floor of their home, how he held her hand as life drained from her eyes, powerless to save her. He carried that guilt like a wound that never healed, convinced that if he had protected her better, if he had been more careful, she would still be alive. Chloe confronted her own tendency to always carry everything alone, admitting she was so afraid of depending on anyone because every person she had trusted in her life had let her down in some way. Her father, who abandoned the family, teachers who said she would never amount to anything, boyfriends who couldn't handle her family responsibilities and ran. She had built walls so high around her heart that letting Leo in had been terrifying. And now that he was there, the thought of losing him was unbearable, even knowing she should want exactly that. They yelled, they cried, they said hard things that needed to be said. Chloe's mother appeared at some point, woken by the noise, and stood in the bedroom doorway watching, with an expression Chloe couldn't decipher. Ryan peeked over her shoulder, his eyes wide. When they finally calmed down, emotionally exhausted, it was nearly dawn. The faint light of the rising sun began to filter through the thin curtains of the apartment. Leo held Chloe's face in his hands, his thumbs caressing her tear-stained cheeks. "If we're going to do this for real, if you really want to stay, I need to teach you how to protect yourself," he said, his voice now calmer but still thick with emotion. "I need to show you the ugliest sides of this world so you're never caught off guard." "And you," Chloe said, holding his wrists, her small fingers barely circling them, "you need to learn to trust that I won't break, that I'm stronger than you think, stronger than I even thought I was." The process of integrating Chloe into Leo's world was brutal and transformative. He taught her to recognize danger, to always be aware of her surroundings, to never completely let her guard down. He showed her how to identify potential threats in a crowd, how to map out exits in any environment, how to read the body language of people who might mean harm. He introduced her to the few loyalists who truly mattered, making it clear that she was under his protection, and anyone who threatened her would face fatal consequences. She met Manny, Leo's right-hand man for over 15 years, a middle-aged man with sad eyes who treated Chloe with cautious respect. She met Dante, the head of security, who taught her basic self-defense with surprising patience. She even met the Costello family lawyer, a nervous man named Victor, who seemed perpetually worried but was brilliantly effective at keeping Leo out of legal trouble. Chloe learned the unspoken language of gestures and glances, the complicated politics of alliances and enmities that governed the city's underworld. It was like cramming for an intensive course in survival, and she attacked the challenge with the same determination she had applied to her studies years before. But more importantly, Leo began to change. Influenced by Chloe's moral perspective, by her innate sense of right and wrong that he realized had been dulled by years of living in a world where morality was a luxury, he started to question operations he had once accepted without a thought. He scaled back particularly violent activities, refused to renew contracts with partners involved in human trafficking, and began the long, dangerous process of gradually moving away from the darkest side of his empire. He started investing more in his legitimate businesses, expanding the restaurant chain, buying hotels that operated within the law, seeking ways to launder not money, but his own reputation. It was a slow and risky process, because men in his position don't just decide to change careers. The transformation did not go unnoticed. Rivals saw it as an opportunity, interpreting his shift as weakness. Old partners wondered if he was losing his edge, if love for a woman was making him soft. One of them, Marco Santini, head of a rival organization with whom Leo had maintained a tense peace for years, decided to test the limits of this new version of Costello. Santini was a dangerous man, old school and without the scruples that Leo, however faint, still maintained. He sent messages through intermediaries, testing boundaries, pushing against long-established agreements. It was a calculated provocation, waiting to see if Leo still had claws or if he had been completely domesticated by love. The attack came when they least expected it, though in hindsight Chloe would realize she should have seen the signs. She was leaving a meeting with a potential supplier for the business she had finally managed to open, a small management consulting firm that Leo had helped her establish, but which she ran with proud independence. It was late afternoon, the parking lot was almost empty, and Chloe was distracted, mentally reviewing the proposal she had just presented. 3 men surrounded her in the parking lot before she could react, moving with the coordination of experienced predators. And despite all the training Dante had given her, despite all the preparation, fear paralyzed her for a crucial moment. It was one thing to practice defensive moves in a safe gym, quite another to face the reality of large, violent men intending to harm her. One of them grabbed her arm, and instinct finally overrode fear. Chloe executed the move Dante had made her practice hundreds of times, twisting and using the attacker's momentum against him. But it was 3 against 1, and she knew she could only last a few seconds before being overpowered. It was Leo who appeared like a vengeful storm, his men disarming the attackers with brutal efficiency. Chloe saw a side of him she had never witnessed before, a pure, controlled violence that was terrifying in its precision. He broke the arm of the man who had touched her without hesitation, the sound of the bone snapping echoing in the empty lot. But what Chloe saw in his face when he finally held her after the threat was neutralized, frantically checking if she was hurt, was not the cold, calculating crime boss, but a man absolutely terrified of losing the person he loved. His hands trembled as they touched her face, her neck, her shoulders, as if he needed to physically confirm she was whole. "Are you okay?" he asked repeatedly. "Chloe, tell me you're okay." "I'm okay," she answered, but her own voice trembled. "Leo, I'm okay." That night, as they lay in the darkness of their bedroom after the adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving them both exhausted, Leo made an admission that would change everything. "I need to get out," he said, his voice raw in the darkness. "I need to find a way to leave all this behind before it gets you killed." Chloe turned to face him, though she could see little more than his profile in the dark. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" she asked. "People like you don't just retire." Leo was silent for a long moment. Chloe could hear his heart beating, could feel the tension in his body. "There's a way," he finally said. "Dangerous, but possible. If I hand over enough territory, broker new power-sharing deals, I can step away, keeping only the legitimate businesses. but it will require negotiations with people who would rather see me dead." "Then let's do it," Chloe said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Let's find a way to get you out of this world." The plan Leo began to orchestrate was risky to the extreme. He would need to negotiate with each of the families that made up Chicago's organized crime ecosystem, offering enough concessions to let him go, but not so many that it made him look weak. One wrong step, one miscalculated word, and he would be dead, and Chloe likely with him. He spent weeks mapping out alliances, identifying who might be reasonable and who would see his exit only as an opportunity to eliminate a rival. Manny was crucial in this process, using his contacts to probe possibilities, to create openings for negotiations. Chloe's mother was hospitalized again during this period, the stress of her daughter's situation aggravating her already fragile condition. Chloe spent days dividing her time between the hospital and the secret meetings Leo was conducting, feeling stretched to the breaking point. It was on a grey afternoon, as she held her mother's hand in the hospital bed, that the conversation that would change everything happened. Her mother, looking smaller and more fragile than Chloe had ever seen her, gripped her daughter's hand with surprising strength. "If you really love this man," she said, her voice weak but determined, "and if he really loves you enough to leave that world, then maybe I was wrong. Maybe he is different. Just promise me you'll be happy, Chloe. Promise me you won't waste your life on regrets like I did." It was a blessing Chloe hadn't expected, and the tears came unbidden, years of tension finally finding release. Ryan was harder to win over. The 17-year-old saw Leo as everything that was wrong with the world, a symbol of privilege and corruption built on the suffering of others. It was only when Leo spent an entire afternoon talking honestly with him, not as a condescending adult, but as someone who respected his opinions, admitting his mistakes and explaining not to justify but to be understood, that the barriers began to fall. "You've hurt people," Ryan said directly, looking Leo in the eye with a courage that made Chloe proud. "How do you live with that?" Leo didn't flinch from the question. "I don't live with it well," he answered honestly. "I carry every bad decision, every person I've hurt, like stones in my chest. And the only thing I can do now is try to be better, to try to do some good with what I've built." Ryan considered this for a long moment. "And my sister?" he finally asked. "Do you really love her, or is she just another thing you want to own?" The question was like a knife, but Leo answered without hesitation. "I love your sister more than I love my own life," he said, "and I will spend every day I have left trying to be worthy of her." It was enough. It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was a start. The negotiations took months. There were times when Chloe was sure Leo wouldn't survive, nights when he left for meetings, and she lay awake, unable to breathe properly until he returned. She learned to recognize the levels of danger by the men who accompanied him. The more security, the riskier the meeting. One night he came back with a cut above his eye, the result of a negotiation that had almost turned violent. Chloe cleaned the wound with hands shaking with anger and fear, wanting to scream at him for risking himself, but understanding that each risk was a step closer to freedom. But slowly, patiently, Leo wove a web of new agreements, redistributing power in ways that satisfied rivals' ambitions while maintaining his own safety. He gave lucrative territories to Santini, forged new alliances with smaller families eager to grow, and created a power vacuum that others were happy to fill as long as it meant his peaceful exit. The day it all finally came together was anticlimactic in its simplicity. Leo came home at dusk from a final meeting, finding Chloe waiting on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city glittering under the darkening sky. "It's done," he said simply, stopping beside her and looking at the same view. "I'm out," Chloe turned to him, searching his eyes for lies or half-truths, but all she saw was exhausted relief and something that could be hope. "For real?" she asked, barely daring to believe it. "For real," he confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "I still have the restaurants, the hotels, the legitimate investments, but the rest of it, all of that, it's over." She should have celebrated, should have jumped for joy, but all she could do was cry. All the tension, all the fear of the past months finally caught up with her, pouring out in sobs that shook her entire body. Leo pulled her into his arms, and they stood there as the city pulsed below them. Two survivors of worlds that had tried to destroy them, united by a love that had proven stronger than all odds. The wedding was small, just close family and the few true friends who had remained through it all. Chloe's mother, still frail but determined, insisted on wearing her best dress and walked her daughter to the makeshift altar in the penthouse's private garden, her steps slow but steady. Ryan served as the best man, having finally accepted that Leo genuinely loved his sister and was willing to do anything to keep her safe. Sarah, the fellow waitress who had inadvertently started it all by asking Chloe to cover her shift that fateful night, was the maid of honor, laughing through her tears about how a simple sweetheart had transformed two lives so completely. "Who knew," she whispered to Chloe before the ceremony began, "that covering one shift could change everything like this?" Manny attended, along with Dante and a few others who had become unexpected allies. Even Victor, the nervous lawyer, showed up with an overly expensive gift and a genuine smile. In the months that followed, a new life emerged from the ashes of the old. Chloe expanded her consulting firm, building a reputation for competence and integrity that attracted clients genuinely impressed by her work, not just associates looking for favors from Leo. She hired employees, moved into a real office, and felt the deep satisfaction of building something of her own, something clean. Leo, for his part, discovered an unexpected passion for philanthropy, using his fortune and knowledge of Chicago's streets to fund programs that helped young people escape the world of crime he had left behind. He opened community centers, funded scholarships, created job opportunities. It was his form of atonement, perhaps, trying to balance the scales after years on the other side. It wasn't perfect. There were nights when Leo would wake up sweating from nightmares about Julia, about Chloe, about all the lives he had taken or destroyed in his rise to power. Chloe learned to recognize the signs, to wake with him and hold his hand in the darkness until the demons receded. There were days when Chloe wondered if she had made the right choice, if she should have listened to the warnings and run when she still could. But in every moment of doubt, they found each other, reminded themselves of what they had survived together, of the love they had built on such unlikely ground. A year after the wedding, Chloe discovered she was pregnant. The news caught them off guard during an ordinary breakfast. She had taken the test by herself, unable to wait, and simply placed the positive result next to Leo's plate without a word. He looked at the test, then at her, then back at the test, as if his brain needed time to process the information. The joy in both of them was undeniable when it finally registered. Leo stood up so fast, he knocked over his chair, swept Chloe into his arms, and spun her around until she protested laughingly that she was getting dizzy. He placed his hand on his wife's still flat stomach that same night, marveling at the life growing there, a life that represented not his dark past, but a future full of possibility and redemption. The pregnancy was smooth but emotionally intense. Leo became overprotective to the point of being suffocating, and Chloe had to firmly remind him several times that being pregnant didn't make her an invalid. Chloe's mother improved remarkably, as if having a grandchild on the way gave her a renewed reason to fight her illness. Ryan began preparing to be an uncle with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. On the day their daughter was born after 14 hours of labor, small and perfect, with hair that promised to be as red as her mother's, Leo cried for the first time since Julia's death. But these were tears of joy, of gratitude for a second chance he didn't deserve but would honor with every breath. He held the tiny girl in hands that seemed too big, terrified of breaking her, marveling that something so perfect could exist. Chloe held his hand as they held their newborn together, whom they had decided to name Sophia, remembering that night at the Crimson Palace that seemed to have happened in another lifetime. She never imagined that a simple term of endearment, a sweetheart whispered unthinkingly to a handsome stranger, could lead to all this, to a family, to a love that overcame impossibilities, to a life neither of them could have foreseen when their eyes first met across a restaurant table. As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that streamed through the hospital windows, Leo kissed his wife's forehead and murmured, "My love," turning the words that started it all into a renewed promise, a reminder, a vow that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, united by the love that refused to be broken by circumstance, by social divides, or by the dangers of worlds that should never have touched but in meeting created something stronger, truer, and more enduring than both. And as Sophia slept peacefully in their arms, oblivious to the complicated history that brought her into existence, Chloe knew with absolute certainty that every difficult choice, every moment of fear, every risk taken had been worth it to reach this perfect moment. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.